The sky over Earth burned as massive alien warships descended from the stars, their dark metallic hulls blotting out the sun. At first, the people of Earth thought it was another hoax, a trick of the internet, or some elaborate military test. But then the sirens wailed. Every major city was under attack. The Draken Empire, a ruthless force that had conquered countless worlds, had come to claim Earth as just another addition to its growing domain. Their soldiers, towering reptilian creatures clad in advanced armor, poured into the streets, weapons humming with energy as they fired upon anything that moved. Buildings crumbled, streets turned into war zones, and the air was filled with the deafening sound of destruction. The invaders expected an easy conquest, just like the many worlds they had crushed before. But this time, they had made a mistake. This was not just another planet. This was Earth. The first wave of the invasion was met with sheer chaos. Governments scrambled to respond. Military forces engaged the enemy with everything they had, but it was clear that conventional warfare would not be enough. The Draken had energy shields, advanced targeting systems, and weapons capable of melting through steel like butter. They moved with precision, taking down key defense points in mere hours. The Galactic Council, watching from their distant, secure chambers, saw no hope for humanity. According to their calculations, Earth should have fallen within a day. But something unexpected happened. Something that no calculation, no prediction, and no alien strategist could have foreseen. Humanity did not surrender. Instead of fear, the invaders were met with defiance. Instead of submission, they were met with rage. Civilians who had never held a weapon before took up arms, using whatever they could find. Old rifles, makeshift explosives, even simple knives became instruments of resistance. The streets became battlegrounds, each building a fortress. The Draken had invaded expecting to fight an army, but they were now fighting an entire planet. Every man, woman, and even children stood their ground, refusing to give an inch. It was not just soldiers who fought back. It was teachers, engineers, doctors, and shopkeepers, each one proving that humans were not as weak as the galaxy believed. The Draken, for all their superior technology, were not prepared for this kind of war. They were used to crushing resistance with overwhelming force, but humans were different. They adapted too quickly, learning the enemy's tactics in real time. The first squads that stormed into cities found themselves ambushed in alleyways, taken down by human guerrilla fighters who had memorized every inch of their home turf. The Draken's armor, once thought to be impenetrable, was cracked open by humans who figured out its weaknesses, targeting the joints, using fire, and even using their own weapons against them. The invaders' energy rifles soon found their way into human hands, and the very weapons meant to subjugate Earth were now turned against the conquerors. The resistance spread like wildfire. At first, the Draken commanders dismissed it as a minor setback. They increased their forces, sending in more soldiers, deploying heavy artillery, and tightening their grip on the cities. But the more they tried to control the situation, the worse it got. Humanity refused to break. The Draken's forces suffered losses unlike anything they had ever seen. Their supply lines were cut by human saboteurs, their ships sabotaged by engineers who learned how to manipulate alien technology within hours. What was supposed to be an easy victory had turned into a nightmare. The Galactic Council, watching from a distance, could only stare in disbelief. No species had ever resisted like this before. No species had ever turned an invasion into a death trap for their conquerors. As the days passed, the Draken began to realize a terrifying truth. Humans were not just surviving. They were winning. The invaders' tactics, once effective against countless civilizations, were crumbling before human resilience. The Draken soldiers, once confident and fearless, now moved with caution, fearing the unseen traps, the sudden ambushes, the relentless enemy that never seemed to stop fighting. Their morale plummeted, their commanders grew desperate, and for the first time in their history, the Draken Empire faced something they had never encountered before: true resistance. In the heart of the chaos, deep within a ruined city, a lone Draken officer stood atop the remains of a collapsed building, looking out at the battlefield that was once a human metropolis. Smoke and fire painted the sky, and yet, despite all the destruction, the humans still fought. He had once believed them to be weak, primitive, and insignificant. Now he saw them for what they truly were, a force unlike any other in the galaxy. A species that refused to kneel, that refused to die quietly. And for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The streets of Earth, once filled with the sounds of everyday life, had become a battleground where survival was the only rule. Smoke and fire clouded the skies, and rubble lined the roads where mighty buildings once stood. The Draken Empire, a force that had crushed countless civilizations, now found itself trapped in an unwinnable war. They had expected a quick victory, but the humans had turned their invasion into a desperate fight for survival, one that the invaders were struggling to understand. Every corner of the city had become a fortress, every alleyway a potential ambush, and every citizen a warrior. Unlike any enemy the Draken had faced before, humanity did not break under the weight of destruction. They became stronger. They did not surrender in the face of overwhelming force. They adapted. They did not flee when outnumbered. They made every street a graveyard for their enemies. The Draken commanders grew frustrated. Their soldiers had superior weapons, better armor, and complete air dominance, yet the humans continued to resist with an intensity that defied logic. The invaders controlled the skies, but the ground belonged to humanity. Every step forward came at a terrible cost. Every attempt to secure a zone was met with brutal retaliation. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose, and that made them the most dangerous adversaries the Draken had ever encountered. In the first week alone, entire squads of elite warriors had been wiped out in the ruins of cities. At first, the commanders believed it was luck, an anomaly that would be corrected with more reinforcements. But as the days passed, the casualties only increased. It was not luck. It was something far worse. The humans were learning. The Draken had long relied on their superior technology to dominate the battlefield, believing it made them untouchable. Their energy shields could deflect most projectiles, their armor could withstand explosions, and their weapons could incinerate a target in seconds. But humanity had a secret weapon: adaptation. Unlike other species that crumbled in the face of overwhelming firepower, humans studied their enemies. They observed every battle, memorized enemy patterns, and exploited weaknesses that no one had ever dared to consider. When traditional firearms failed, they used explosives. When direct attacks failed, they used deception. When technology failed them, they turned to sheer, relentless determination. The Draken's energy shields, once thought to be impenetrable, were cracked by makeshift explosives thrown from rooftops. Their armor, once believed to be invincible, was shattered by carefully aimed sniper rounds at weak joints. Even their advanced communication systems were being jammed by human engineers who had figured out how to disrupt their signals. At first, the Draken commanders refused to believe that an inferior species could pose a real threat. But reports from the battlefield told a different story. Squads were disappearing in the middle of the night. Outposts were being overrun by guerrilla forces that seemed to strike from the shadows and vanish before reinforcements arrived. Supply chains were cut off by human insurgents who had memorized the enemy's transport routes. Every attempt to establish order was met with even greater resistance. The more pressure the Draken applied, the harder the humans fought back. And then came the most terrifying realization. The humans were not just resisting. They were winning. The Galactic Council, watching the war unfold from a distance, could not believe what they were witnessing. Humanity had been labeled as a primitive, insignificant race, with no real power in the grand scheme of the universe. They were supposed to be weak, incapable of fighting back against an empire as vast as the Draken. Yet here they were, turning one of the most feared armies in the galaxy into a desperate, retreating force. The Council had seen species wiped out in days, entire civilizations brought to their knees without resistance. But humanity was proving to be something else entirely. They were not just surviving an invasion. They were reshaping the very definition of warfare. Deep in the ruins of a once thriving metropolis, a group of human fighters prepared for another strike. Their clothes were torn, their bodies bruised, but their eyes burned with defiance. They had no uniforms, no formal command structure, yet they moved with the precision of seasoned warriors. Every person had a role. Some set traps, others gathered weapons from fallen enemies, and a few hacked into alien technology, repurposing it for their own use. They did not fear the Draken anymore. If anything, they welcomed the fight. The invaders had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. In the heart of the battlefield, a Draken officer stood in disbelief as he watched his forces struggle against an enemy they had once dismissed as weak. He had been trained to expect surrender, to see civilizations fall within days of invasion. Yet here he was, witnessing something he had never seen before: humans pushing back against an empire that had never known defeat. He had read reports of battles, studied countless wars, but nothing had prepared him for this. The humans did not just fight with weapons. They fought with strategy, with sheer determination, with an unbreakable will. And for the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his mind: doubt. The Draken Empire had never lost a war. It had crushed every civilization that dared to stand against it. But now, facing the resistance of humanity, the officer realized that history was about to change. The humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were a force that could not be controlled. And as he looked across the battlefield, watching his forces struggle to maintain control, he wondered if the invasion of Earth had been the greatest mistake the Draken had ever made. Because humanity was not fighting for power. They were fighting for survival. And they would never stop. The Draken Empire had conquered countless planets, reduced civilizations to dust, and erased entire species from existence. Their warships darkened the skies of Earth, their soldiers marched through its cities, and their commanders believed that humanity, like so many before them, would crumble. But the invaders had overlooked something buried deep within the world they sought to claim. Beneath the ruins of human civilization, hidden within the depths of history, lay a power that had been lost for millennia, a strength long forgotten even by humanity itself. As the war raged across the planet, the Draken grew frustrated with their slow progress. Humanity refused to break, adapting to each attack with relentless determination. But as the days passed, something else began to trouble the invaders. Strange reports filtered in from the battlefield. Draken patrols vanishing without a trace, elite squads torn apart in the darkness, and ancient symbols carved into the walls of ruined cities. The Empire's greatest warriors, who had faced countless battles without fear, now whispered of an unseen force rising from the depths of this ancient world. At first, the commanders dismissed the stories as superstition. The humans had no secret weapon, no hidden technology capable of threatening the Empire. But when an entire Draken battalion was found annihilated without a single shot fired, their confidence began to waver. Surveillance footage from the wreckage showed something that defied explanation. The soldiers had been moving through a ruined temple, scanning for signs of resistance, when the shadows themselves seemed to come alive. Shapes moved where there should have been nothing. Whispers filled the air, and then darkness. The next moment, the battalion was gone. No bodies, no weapons, only the scorched remnants of what had once been an elite force. Far from the watchful eyes of the invaders, a group of human survivors gathered around an ancient monument, one that had stood for thousands of years. It was here, deep within the forgotten heart of their world, that they had uncovered the truth. Humanity was not as alone as they had once believed. Buried beneath centuries of history, hidden in the myths of old, was something far older than the Draken, something that had been waiting for the moment it was needed again. The warriors of ancient Earth, the protectors of a time before history was written, had returned. The ruins of ancient temples, and lost cities had begun to stir with a power that defied logic. Symbols that no modern scholar could translate now pulsed with energy. Statues of long-forgotten gods seemed to shift beneath the moonlight, and whispers of an ancient force filled the air. It was not magic, nor was it alien technology. It was something far older, the will of a world that had not yet given up. The invaders had seen Earth as a simple planet, its people as weak and divided. But they had failed to understand the true nature of this world. Humanity had not survived for so long by mere chance. They had been shaped by something greater, forged by the countless struggles of those who had come before. And now, that forgotten strength was awakening. In the heart of a destroyed city, a Draken warlord stood before a captured human, demanding answers. He wanted to know how his forces were being wiped out, how the humans were striking from the shadows, how their weapons were failing against enemies they could not see. But the human only smiled. "You didn't just invade our world," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "You woke it up." That night, the Draken learned what it meant to fear the darkness. The ruins of ancient fortresses that had stood silent for centuries became battlegrounds once more. Shadows moved where there were no soldiers. Voices whispered in languages that had not been spoken in thousands of years, and the very ground beneath the invaders' feet trembled with an unexplainable force. Energy weapons malfunctioned, advanced armor cracked as if struck by unseen hands, and the Empire's greatest warriors found themselves facing something they could not understand. The Galactic Council watched in horror as the war shifted. What had once seemed like an inevitable victory for the Draken was now turning into something far more dangerous. The Council had underestimated Earth, seeing it as just another primitive world. But now, as reports of entire fleets being lost to an unseen force flooded in, they began to wonder if they had made a mistake. Perhaps humanity was not just another race to be conquered. Perhaps Earth was not just another world. Perhaps, just perhaps, there were things in the universe even they did not understand. As the battle raged on, the Draken found themselves standing on the edge of defeat. Their greatest weapons had failed, their strongest warriors had fallen, and their once unshakable confidence had crumbled into fear. They had come to Earth expecting to crush a weak civilization. Instead, they had awakened something ancient, something that had been waiting in the shadows of history. And now, as the remnants of their army fled from the ruins of what should have been their greatest conquest, they realized the terrible truth. This was not their war to win. Earth had never belonged to them, and it never would. The Draken Empire had never known fear. Their fleets had burned countless worlds, their armies had shattered civilizations, and their rule had stretched across the stars for centuries. But on Earth, everything had changed. What had begun as a simple conquest had turned into a nightmare. Their warships were falling from the skies, their warriors were vanishing in the ruins of human cities, and their technology, so advanced, so unstoppable, was failing them. They had expected a swift victory, but instead, they had awakened something beyond their understanding. The shadows of Earth moved with unseen forces, ancient symbols pulsed with forgotten power, and whispers of the past echoed in the air. The Draken were no longer conquerors. They were prey. Deep within the remains of what had once been a great human city, General Vokar, one of the Draken's most feared commanders, stood in the ruins of his war camp. Reports from the battlefield had grown worse with each passing hour. Entire battalions had disappeared, patrols had been found torn apart without a single gunshot heard, and their attempts to control Earth had turned into a desperate struggle to survive. He had fought in hundreds of wars, had crushed countless species beneath his heel, but never had he faced something like this. This was not war, it was a reckoning. The humans were not just resisting. They were striking with a force that defied logic. They moved through the ruins like ghosts, their weapons silent yet deadly, their tactics unpredictable. But it wasn't just their fighters that troubled the Draken. It was the world itself. The planet, once thought weak and defenseless, now felt alive. Their technology had begun to fail for reasons they couldn't explain. Energy weapons refused to fire. Communications fell silent. Even their armored suits, designed to withstand the harshest conditions in the universe, had begun to malfunction. And then there were the ruins, structures that should have been nothing more than crumbling stone. Yet they pulsed with energy, whispering in a language older than any the Draken had ever encountered. Vokar's claws tightened around the hilt of his plasma blade as he listened to his officers argue. Some demanded reinforcements, others insisted on retreat. Fear had begun to spread through the ranks, an emotion that no Draken warrior had ever admitted to before. But Vokar knew the truth. There were no reinforcements coming. The Empire had already sent its strongest fleets, its deadliest warriors, and yet they were losing. The Galactic Council, once certain of humanity's defeat, had now fallen silent. They had seen what was happening on Earth, and they no longer looked at it as a battle. They saw it as a warning. Far from the ruins of the Draken war camp, a group of human survivors gathered in the darkness, watching the enemy crumble. Among them stood Elias Carter, a former historian who had become a leader of the resistance. He had spent his life studying Earth's past, searching for forgotten truths buried beneath time. And now, in the midst of war, he had found something more valuable than any weapon: knowledge. The invaders had made a fatal mistake. They had seen Earth as just another world, its people as just another species to be conquered. But they had failed to understand the truth. Humanity was not fighting alone. The planet itself had awakened, calling upon the strength of its past. The ruins, the symbols, the whispers in the wind, they were more than just history. They were warnings, echoes of those who had come before, those who had defended Earth in ages long past. And now, their strength had returned. The resistance had begun to strike back with an intensity that shook the enemy to its core. They moved through the shadows, using the land itself against the invaders. Traps were set in ancient ruins. Technology was hijacked and turned against its creators. And one by one, the Draken strongholds fell. But the true turning point came when the invaders realized they were no longer fighting just humans. Strange phenomena had begun to occur on the battlefield. Warriors vanishing into thin air, weapons turning to dust in their hands, entire Draken forces being found frozen in time as if trapped in a nightmare. The Empire had always relied on its strength, its weapons, its overwhelming force. But now, none of it mattered. They were facing something beyond their understanding, beyond their control. In the depths of an abandoned temple, Elias and his team stood before an ancient structure, its surface glowing with symbols no human alive could read. But he didn't need to understand the language to know its meaning. This was not just a relic of the past. It was a key, a message from those who had fought before, those who had protected Earth from threats long forgotten. The Draken believed they were the first to challenge humanity, but they were wrong. Others had come before them. Others had tried to take this world, and all of them had failed. As the battle raged on, the invaders' forces began to collapse. Their fleets, once powerful enough to reduce planets to ash, now drifted lifelessly in orbit, their systems shutting down one by one. Their soldiers, once feared across the galaxy, now cowered in the ruins, hunted by an enemy they could not see. And then, at last, the order came. General Vokar, the most ruthless warrior of the Draken Empire, issued the command no one had ever thought possible: retreat. The Empire had lost. For the first time in its long history, the Draken had been defeated. Not by superior firepower, not by advanced technology, but by something they had never believed in: humanity's resilience, the strength of a world that refused to fall, and the power of a past that had never truly been forgotten. As the last Draken ships fled the planet, Elias stood among the ruins, watching the sky. The war was not over. The Empire would never forget what had happened here, but neither would humanity. They had faced the greatest force in the galaxy, and they had won. And now, as Earth stood silent beneath the stars, one truth remained clear: this was their world, and it always would be. The stars stood silent as the last Draken warships flooded the Sol system. The once mighty empire, feared across the galaxy, had been humiliated on a world they had believed weak. Earth, the planet they had thought to be an easy conquest, had become their graveyard. Their fleets were in ruins, their soldiers broken, and their confidence shattered. But the true damage was not to their forces, it was to their pride. Never before had the Draken suffered such a defeat, and the worst part, they still did not understand how it had happened. Their weapons had failed, their technology had turned against them, and their warriors had fallen to an enemy they could not comprehend. It was not just humanity they had fought. It was something far older, far greater, something that had waited in the shadows of Earth's history, ready to strike when the time came. Now, as the last of their kind escaped into deep space, a single transmission echoed across the galactic network. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a message, humanity's final message to the Draken, to the Galactic Council, to every civilization that had watched the war unfold. Across 1,000 star systems, leaders and warriors listened in stunned silence as the voice of Elias Carter, the historian turned resistance leader, spoke with calm certainty. You came to our world expecting weakness. You thought Earth would fall like all the others. You thought your technology, your fleets, your weapons would be enough. But you never stopped to ask who we were. You never wondered why we survived, why we thrived, why no empire before you had ever ruled us. Now you understand. Across the galaxy, rulers sat in uneasy silence, their minds racing. The Draken had been the greatest military force known to exist. If even they had failed, then what did that mean for the rest of them? Earth is not just a planet. It is not just a home. It is something more, something that does not bow, does not break, does not surrender. You did not fight humans alone. You fought a world that remembers, a world that has seen war before, a world that does not forget. You fought the weight of history itself. The words carried a weight that could not be ignored. The ruins of Earth had never been just ruins. They had been something greater, something lost to time, something powerful enough to turn an invasion into a massacre. The Galactic Council had seen what happened. They had seen the impossible, but the message was not finished. You will never set foot on our world again. We will not seek revenge. We do not need to. Your own fear will be punishment enough. You will remember this day, and when you look at the stars, you will know Earth is watching. Silence followed. And then, across the galaxy, the message ended. The transmission cut out. There was no further explanation, no demand, no ultimatum. It was simply the truth, spoken in words that could not be ignored. The Draken Empire had been defeated, and the galaxy had been changed forever. Far from the war-torn ruins of Earth, in the halls of the Galactic Council, silence reigned. The greatest minds of the universe, the leaders of countless civilizations, sat frozen in place. They had once debated humanity's fate, dismissing the species as insignificant, unworthy of true recognition. But now, everything had changed. The Draken, their strongest warriors, had fallen. Their fleets, their armies, their best soldiers had all been crushed by a world that should have never stood a chance. And the way humanity had won, it defied logic, defied science, defied everything the galaxy believed to be true. The truth was simple. Humanity was not to be conquered, not to be ruled, not to be controlled. The Draken had learned this lesson too late, and now the rest of the galaxy had no choice but to accept it. On Earth, Elias Carter stood among the ruins, watching the sky. The war was over, but the future was uncertain. The galaxy would never forget what had happened. Some would fear humanity, others would seek to understand them, and a few perhaps would try again. But they would fail, just as the Draken had failed, because Earth was not just a world. It was something else, something ancient, something waiting. And should the galaxy ever forget that truth, humanity would be there to remind them. Their message had been sent, and the universe would never be the same again.